Hello and welcome. My name is Alan. This was meant to be Tuesday's video for state governments and officials. We were looking at the state of Minnesota. So let's hop into this. For Minnesota, it's probably the most well known is the land of 10,000 lakes, but it's also known as the North Star State, the Gopher State. Thus, why your hockey team is the Minnesota North Stars. I think they moved to Dallas though and became the Dallas North Stars. The Golden Gophers is the collegiate mascot. So Minnesota Golden Gophers being the Gopher State. The land of 10,000 lakes is also why the team, the Los Angeles Lakers, isn't called the Lakers, because originally the team was in Minnesota. It was the Minnesota Lakers. Now, capital city is St. Paul, but the largest city is Minneapolis, but usually there's a lot of the times they're said together, Minneapolis, St. Paul, because they're called the Twin Cities. They're so close. So yeah. Um, 12th largest state in area, 86,936 square miles, or 225,163 square kilometers. And it is the 22nd largest in population, only 5,793,151 people, ranking it 36th in population density. So it's a fairly large state, but its number of people there is not near as many as you might see in other. The demonym, meaning the person from the state, is called Minnesotan. It is a state in the upper Midwestern region of the U.S., bordered by the Canadian provinces of Manitoba and Ontario to the north and east, and by the U.S. states of Wisconsin to the east, Iowa to the south, and North Dakota and South Dakota to the west. The northeast corner has a water boundary with Michigan, and it is the 12th largest state in land area, well, area in general, because it's land and water, and 22nd most populous, with about 5.8 million residents, approximate. It is known as the land of 10,000 lakes and has 14,420 bodies of fresh water covering at least 10 acres each. Roughly a third of the state is forested, which is why its current NBA team is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Wolves being something you can see in Minnesota, and like I said, it is forested, so Timberwolves. Much of the remainder is prairie and farmland. More than 60% of Minnesotans live in Minneapolis-St. Paul area, known as the Twin Cities, where Minnesota's main political, economic, and cultural hub. is and the 16th largest metropolitan area in the U.S. Other minor metropolitan areas in the area are Duluth, Minnesota, Mankato, Minnesota, Moorhead, Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota, and St. Cloud, Minnesota. So yeah, hadn't really heard of Mankato, but I've heard of Moorhead, Minnesota, St. Cloud, and of course Duluth, Minnesota. Duluth Trading Company. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and look at the constitutions for the state of Minnesota. It was written in 1857 and approved by the U.S. Senate 1858, marking the admittance of Minnesota to the Union. There have been nearly 120 amendments approved, some often multiple items at once, with perhaps the most significant being a reorganization in 1974 to simplify the document. Not making a new one, but simplification. But yeah. So apparently they've had the one constitution I've had a number of things before and after, but yeah, the actual Constitution itself was the only one I see. So, all right, now let's go ahead and look at the state government. It is, like many other states, divided up into three divisions: executive, legislature, judicial. Your great majority of states are going to take after that commonality with the federal government. But the executive branch is led by the governor of Minnesota, your current governor, Tim Walz. The governors serve a 4-year, serve terms of 4 years, but there is no term limit. Let's see, next in line, of course, is the lieutenant governor of Minnesota. Let's see. Similar to the U.S. president, governor has veto power over bills passed. And in most states, but unlike the U.S. president, the governor can make line item vetoes, meaning just strip out one section and make change or whatever. To be governor of Minnesota must be 25 years old upon assuming office, must have been a resident of Minnesota for 1 year before election. You have the cabinet, which is the current, these are your current cabinet members. Department of Administration under Lamar Gronval. Let me say, I think the cabinet's majority of it, at least, is just picked, nominated, and usually given acceptance or whatever. But Department of Administration, Tamar Gronval. Department of Agriculture, Tom Peterson. Department of Children, Youth, and Families, Tiki Brown. Department of Commerce, Grace Arnold. Department of Corrections, Paul Schnell. Department of Education, Willie Jett. Department of Employment and Economic Development, Matt Varlick. Department of Health, Brooke Cunningham. Department of the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, Dennis Olson. Department of Minnesota Housing and Finance Agency, Jennifer Lamel Ho. Department of Human Rights, Rebecca Lucero. Department of Human Services, Shireen Gandhi, who is interim commissioner. Department of the Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation Board, Ida Rukavina. Department of the Chief Information Officer of Minnesota IT Services, Tarek Tomes. Department of Labor and Industry, Nicole Blissenbach. Department of Management and Budget, Aaron Campbell. Department of Minnesota Bureau of Mediation Services, Johnny Villarreal, I'm not sure. Department of Metropolitan Council, Charlie Zell. The Adjutant General, Major General Sean P. Mankey. Department of Natural Resources, Sarah Strawman. Department of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Katrina Kessler. Department of Public Safety, Bob Jacobson. Department of Revenue, Paul Marquardt. Department of Transportation, Nancy Daubenberger. And Department of Veterans Affairs, Brad Lindsay. The governor's residence is in St. Paul, Minnesota, being the capital and the state seat of everything, so yeah. With that, let's go ahead and look at the list of governors there have been over Minnesota's history. We began with when Minnesota was a territory, 1840s. First one you have is Alexander Ramsey, who was appointed by Zachary Taylor. Willis A. Gorman, appointed by Franklin Pierce. Samuel Metairie, appointed by James Buchanan. And then Minnesota became a state. We get William Hastings Sibley, Alexander Ramsey. Ramsey was the first under territory. He became the second when it was a state. So Henry Adoniram Swift, Stephen Miller, William Rainey Marshall, Horace Austin, Cushman K. Davis, John S. Pillsbury, Lucius Frederick Hubbard, and Andrew Ryan McGill. That brings us into the Gilded Age, 1880s. In America, so yeah. But yeah. With that, let's go ahead and look at the elected officials for Minnesota. There's the state government. You have your governor and lieutenant governor. Governor Tim Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. So they must work on a ticket together, run on the same ticket or whatever. Some, like I said, some states they do, some states they don't. They look at the Secretary of State for Minnesota, Steve Simon. Look at Minnesota's Attorney General, Keith Ellison, who used to be a Minnesota representative in the U.S. Congress. But he went to Minnesota to serve there on the state level. So he's the current Attorney General. And the Minnesota State Auditor, Julie Blaha. Peggy Flanagan and Tim Walz. There's a look. Legislature. So yeah, with that, let's look at the legislature. Minnesota legislature. It is, of course, bicameral. Senate, House of Representatives, bicameral just meaning two-bodied, double-chambered. Your Senate president is Bobby Joe Champion, and your House Speaker, Lisa DeMuth. Your current composition of people is in the Senate, you have 33 Republicans out of 67, and you have 34 DFL, Farmer Labor Party, Democratic Farmer Labor Party. You have 34 out of 67. So it's pretty well split down the middle for the Senate. The House, you have 67 Republicans. There's 134 total. 67 are Republicans, 2 are vacant, and 65 are Democratic Farmer Labor Party members. So just think of the Democratic Farmer Labor as Minnesota Democrats. But as you can see, pretty split. House members are elected to 2-year terms, terms that last for 2 years. Senators to 4-year terms, terms that last for 4. In years ending 2 and 6. And 2-year terms ending in 0. What? If you're only doing 2-year terms ending to 0, all you can do is 10 years. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but 4-year terms, 2, 6, but it get to the next 2, that's a 6-year period. There's something funky on that. Anyway, both houses of the legislature meet between January and the first Monday following the third Saturday of each year, not exceeding 120 legislative days per biennium. So 120 days, I'm assuming the biennium is just the 2-year period. So that's 60 days per year approximately. Like I said, Some states do full-time, which is not the common. A lot of states, they just have them in there for a short period to do legislation. Governor Jesse Ventura advocated the idea of changing the legislature to be unicameral while in office, but the concept did not obtain widespread support. Basically, a one-bodied legislature instead of bicameral, which is the two-bodied legislature. The lack of action in 2004 session is said to be the reason why a number of Republican House members lost their seats in the November election, and the Democratic Farmer Labor Party minority grew from 53 to 66. The Republican majority was reduced from 81 to 68. And so it's kind of been between the two groups. But yeah, that's a look at Minnesota's legislature. Now, let's go ahead and look at the court system. For Minnesota. There's courts of Minnesota. That's what I was kind of looking for. Courts of Minnesota is the judicial system approved by Minnesota. You have the Minnesota Supreme Court. Under that, the Minnesota Court of Appeals. And then you have Minnesota District Courts, of which there are 10 districts. And under them are the Minnesota Tax Court and the Minnesota Workers' Compensation Court of Appeals. So, yeah. Let's go ahead and open that up in one as well, since we don't have it available at the moment. Supreme Court of Minnesota. Of course, the highest court for the state. Judges serve 6-year terms. But at the age of 70, they are required to retire. Currently, there are 7 Supreme Court seats. Let's see. Yeah, of course, like I said, Minnesota Supreme Court, your highest court. The governor appoints a replacement when a midterm vacancy occurs. Most vacancies occur during a term, so when elections are set to occur. The most recent was an open seat to the court in 1992 when former Minnesota Vikings player Alan Page was elected. Judges in Minnesota have a mandatory retirement age of 70. Rosalie E. Wall became the first woman to serve on the Minnesota Supreme Court, and Alan Page became the first African American to serve on the Minnesota Supreme Court. Um, and Anne McKeague, descendant of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, became the first Native American justice in 2016. Her appointment also marked the second time the court had a majority of women since 1991. So, yeah. Your current justices: Chief Justice Natalie Hudson, and your associate justices: Anne McKeague, Paul Thiessen, Gordon Moore, Carl Procaccini, Sarah Hennessy, and Theodora Gaitis. I'm not sure how the name's pronounced with the unusual symbol on it. I guess that's what, an umlaut? The double dots? But yeah. Next, let's take a look at the Minnesota Court of Appeals. The court below the Supreme Court Intermediate Appellate Court, mandatory retirement age of 70, and term lengths are 6 years. There are 19 justices who serve on the Court of Appeals. Let's see. So they're the intermediate, although the only exception to the grant of jurisdiction are statewide election contests, which go straight to the Supreme Court, first-degree murder cases, which go straight to the Supreme Court, and appeals on the Minnesota Tax Court and Minnesota Workers' Compensation Court of Appeals, which go directly to the Supreme Court. Otherwise, it's likely going to go to the Minnesota Court of Appeals first. Supreme Court of Minnesota has discretionary review over decisions by the Minnesota Court of Appeals. So, yeah. Under Minnesota law, the Court of Appeals must issue a decision within 90 days, 3 months, after oral arguments. If no oral argument is held, the decision is due within 90 days of the case scheduled conference date. Deadline is the shortest imposed on any appellate court in the nation. The court expedites decisions on child custody cases, mental health commitments, and other matters which the parties request accelerated response. 19 judges on the Court of Appeals are elected to renewable 6-year terms. All judges who have served on the court have been appointed by the governor. Because when a midterm vacancy occurs, the governor appoints a replacement to that term that ends. So currently, there's a lot of them that took office in the midterms. So yeah. Chief Justice is selected by the governor from a member of the courts to serve a fixed 3-year term. 8 seats are associated with Minnesota's congressional districts, but seated judges remain eligible for those platforms even if they later move to another district. Remaining seats are at-large positions that can be filled without regard to residency. The most recent reapportionment occurred in 2022, and the seats of the Court of Appeals were redesignated in January 2023. Your current Chief Justice for the Court of Appeals is Jennifer Fritsch. So yeah, that's a look at the Minnesota Court of Appeals. Now, let's look at the Minnesota District Courts. 6 years, 6-year terms is the length of the terms they serve. They are required to retire at the age of 70. Sounds very similar to the other courts. Here are your districts to the courts. Your first, I think this little district right here is second, then third, then this right here is fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 8th, 9th, and 10th. So 10 districts. What else we got? There are 289 judges in total for all the district courts in Minnesota in 2019. Assigned to geographic districts, each district has 3 or more judges who are elected by the voters of the district in nonpartisan judicial elections to 6-year terms. So whatever district you're in, that's which district's judges you vote for on district court. And it shows the counties each district serves. Yeah. And 10th. That's a look at the district courts of the judicial system. Finally, we don't have tax court, but we can take a look at Minnesota Workers' Compensation Court of Appeals, which is an independent agency of the Minnesota State Executive Branch. So even though it is a court of appeals, it's technically under the executive branch and was created by Minnesota Chapter 175A and consists of 4 judges and 1 chief judge. And each judge is appointed to a 6-year term by the governor. Positions are confirmed by the Minnesota Senate. Your current judges: Chief Judge Patricia J. Milan, with Associate Justices Deborah K. Sundquist, Sean M. Quinn, Thomas J. Christensen, and Catherine H. Carlson. And of course, more than likely deals with workers' compensation issues, employment issues, that kind of stuff. So, but that has been a look at the state government and officials for the state of Minnesota. We'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting these links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.